But essentially, what studying the troubled teen industry shows us is that even like Paris Hilton, who's
Yeah.
become the face of this, you
Mm.
can be the richest, whitest person, but the intersectionality of being a youth or an individual that is in a position where others have power over them, then you still are subject to these levels of coercive control or the social construction of deviance to have you conform to the dominant
Welcome to the
paradigms.
Open Notes podcast. Our study group includes me, Nora Mortimer, Kiana Gerhart, and
Hello.
Angela Thompson.
Hello.
Our guest today is Heather Mooney, a postdoctoral scholar and criminologist. Grab a snack and your notebook. Let's get ready to study. So our first thing that we always do at the podcast is we talk about our Zoom backgrounds. So what's the story behind it, or what does it say about you? We have all changed our backgrounds, but what is yours, Heather?
So I typically don't do a background. I just have my office, and I guess the story behind my office is that it's actually kind of an auxiliary building on my property, and it was from a flower farmer. So that's kind of a neat story about the history of it is that she finished this out, and this is actually all refurbished like farm wood from her flower farm that her handyman like put together. And you can't see them all, but I put my degrees up on the wall there. So I usually leave it because I thought it was such a nice background.
Yes, it is.
So
I agree, it looks lovely. Speaking of flowers, I have like flowers behind me, but I recently went to like a flower wholesale with my father, and he was like, I have two hands, you have two hands, pick out 4 plants. And so they have joined I have like a stack of shelves that are just filled with flowers. And then they're on my dresser, they're outside in the living room. I have a lot of plants to take care of. But a lot of them are flowering because it's entering the summer season. So I was like, let's keep it up in the Zoom background with all the flowers.
Very nice. Very nice. Mine is today is the last day of Maymester for me, so I'm in vacation mode finally. As I was telling Nora and Kiana, I am not honestly a beach person, but the idea of going to a beach and just relaxing today is wonderful. So there you go.
and looking and preparing for the interview with Heather today. It seems like I think it will be a very heavy topic. So I thought something kind of white with unfortunately, my chair keeps disappearing and reappearing, but I thought having this background would be kind of a nice, like calming effect, if that makes sense. But I'm
Yes, it
ready,
does.
and I'm so interested in hearing what Heather has to say today.
Absolutely. So, Heather, could you tell us some about your educational background and your career highlights?
Sure. Thank you for asking and having me. I am a sociologist through and through. I I took a gap year, which was definitely one of the highlights of my life after high school. And so I backpacked through Europe with my best friend at the time. And thank goodness we did because it was in the year 2000.
Mhm.
So it was lovely to travel pre 9/11, where flights were like affordable and we had a good time. And it was honestly doing that, talking to other travelers and a lot of college students and learning about the world and philosophy and interacting with, culture and these historical sites that gave me the passion and drive to go to college. Getting out of high school, only wanted to be a waitress. And I did. I worked at a cafe on Main Street in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and loved it, but didn't realize I was a nascent sociologist in the sense that I wanted to ask everyone I met what made them tick. And so I was doing like informal, basically mini interviews all the time. And so through that kind of experiential learning and natural curiosity and then traveling, I realized I couldn't debate as well with the other college graduates that were formally trained. And so I came home and applied to colleges and started out in the Pacific Northwest at Lewis and Clark, and then ended up back home at the time in Michigan due to my dad got into a really bad car accident with Joseph Light at the end of my freshman year. And so I ended up going to Eastern Michigan University, and I had started discovering the best advice I got when I was an undergrad was like, do what you enjoy. And so I took a bunch of classes with gen eds, and I loved sociology and philosophy. And so I started taking those courses in criminology. I actually, as a freshman, got into a 200 level criminology course and started writing incarcerated individuals as a pen pal because I realized that was one of the best things that we could do even back then. And that's been a lifelong practice. So I graduated with a sociology bachelor's. I did a lot of experiential learning. I was really into alternative spring breaks in San Francisco, working with AIDS service organizations, and that became a lifelong passion and volunteer service area that I've had since freshman year as well. Um, and then I really embraced being an applied sociologist because I really wanted what I learned to make a difference in the real world. And so I have worked for nonprofits and local government, and that's how I ended up getting my master's. One of the highlights was working for our county treasurer's office doing mortgage foreclosure prevention because I had been working at a homeless shelter when I graduated from my bachelor's. I'd started volunteering through undergrad and did a undergraduate like honors thesis on recently incarcerated homeless men and their opinions of rehabilitation programs. And so that parlayed into my first job as a case manager at the homeless shelter, which I greatly enjoyed, but I was seeing the revolving door and wanted to do something that was really more preventative. And so that's what led me to county government and doing real foreclosure prevention work and homelessness prevention by helping people either to stay in their homes or move into affordable, sustainable housing if it wasn't. And that was in 2006. So we were right ahead of the Great Recession and kind of saw the writing on the walls and were really able to do some really cool on the ground, collaborative, innovative, in real time applied sociology and policy work with an interdisciplinary team later of lawyers and legal advocates and housing counselors and social workers and government workers and um, responded to the community. And so during that time, I got my master's in sociology, studying housing inequality, the foreclosure crisis, sustainable and affordable housing, and how do we do that? Because I really believe that to solve a lot of the social problems that I encountered and studied as a sociologist, we need a safe, base. And without that affordable, sustainable housing, kind of like that housing first model that we now have, decades ago, that was the direction I had been advocating and moving in. So I did the master's part-time while I worked in county government, and found that to be very useful and was able to take my master's thesis on the mortgage foreclosure crisis and actually help apply and develop policy and develop a statewide data collection process for tracking that I shared with a statewide task force and really, again, applied everything from my master's to the job that I had. And I worked myself out of that when, after 6 or 7 years, I offered them the idea to do post-purchase counseling and continue the home ownership education and prevention, but there wasn't really the funds in government or the will or location to house that. We didn't really have a nonprofit agency either that was dedicated to housing. So we just folded my position and I decided to go back at the urging of my undergraduate mentor, Dr. Denise Reiling, and get my doctorate. So I went to Wayne State and again in sociology pursued that and kind of worked with the housing stuff and then pivoted into the troubled teen industry because I had lived experience in that myself and was curious
and have always been concerned about individuals that complete suicide or have overdoses or dealing with co-occurring disorders, and really
Mhm.
wanted to understand if these programs worked and realized there was no data on it, no longitudinal studies really. And so that's what morphed into my dissertation, the troubled teen industry. And that's really how I also embraced becoming a criminologist, a critical criminologist, was because the sociologists actually didn't understand and didn't seem to get it. I
Mhm.
did not have good reception at ASA and other regional sociology conferences when I was trying to explain it, but the critical criminologist and the convict criminologist totally got it, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
And so I worked a lot with other criminologists and convict criminologists to this day, and have really worked on the coercive control in that arena. And of course, criminology is like nested right in with, within sociology essentially. So, um, that kind of was a natural fit, and that's what led my way there. And so since then, I've just been doing kind of research, teaching, advocacy in higher ed, and I'm kind of pivoting out of that now
Mhm.
as the current circumstances necessitate it.
So, as you were talking about the troubled teen industry, I think we think about industry as like a different meaning. So, why do we apply that label to the demographic of troubled teens?
That's a great question, because those that are in it don't like the word industry either.
Mm-hmm.
I call it an industry because it's for profit and it's designed for parents. Most of the programs are pushing pills and programs,
Mhm.
what Elliot Curry, the criminologist, calls the pejorative assumption, where we inherently blame the youth for these cultural shortcomings and issues. And if we can just shove them away, and there's a history, if we look at it, of exiling different individuals that have stigma or others or are on the margins into coercive control or facilities like we're seeing with crimmigration right now. I think they're even talking about facilities for women in Saudi Arabia right now,
Yes.
history of indigenous individuals in boarding
Mhm.
schools, but essentially what studying the troubled teen industry shows us is that even like Paris Hilton, who's
Yeah.
become the face of this, you
Mhm.
can be the richest, whitest person, but the intersectionality of being a youth or an individual that is in a position where others have power over them, then you still are subject to these levels of coercive control or the social construction of deviance to have you conform to the dominant paradigms. And that's what I was trying to, well, first I was hoping there was something that worked that we could share with others and help all youth. But unfortunately, what I saw more of was this is of the outsider and othering and using it as mechanisms of power and control to reinforce the status quo. And I was hoping that it would develop more solidarity with others to see the similarities in everyone's plight if they don't kind of um, bow down to the system through the exile that they're being forced through. I think we have to work differently to work with, to really listen to what happened to people, and integrate them and bring them in instead of pushing them away. So I think it really speaks of larger issues like that. And then if you trace the money through the troubled teen industry, very much similar, mostly Republican groups, Bain Capital, notably tied to Mitt Romney, and others were ones that bought the school that I was in, very similar to like Geo Group and Core Civic and some of these places um, that are funding, or the health industrial complex, turning a lot of them into rehabs and other places. So if you trace the money, it's very much about industry. And if even in my dissertation, tracing the history of the school, it was always about profits um, over people's like wellness and well-being, unfortunately.
My husband and I adopted our daughter when she was 14, and she had spent about 8 years in foster care. And so the troubled teen industry resonates with me because that was something we really had to interact with, grapple with, come to terms with, and try to pull her away from and out of because it was. the experience was so institutionalized. It was mind-boggling to say the least. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the foster industry, as well as what I'm really discovering is that we're seeing even more studies of any youth that wasn't like mainstreamed, or had some inequities, with, any neurodivergency,
Mhm.
right? Any kind of larger fringe stuff really gets pushed and labeled instead of integrated and understood and supported. And at the crux of all of this really is, children's rights and the fact that the United States has not signed on to the UNCRC, and respected children's rights and abilities and caring to decrease that. So it's awesome that you're aware of it and have lived experience with it and have worked with it because I know that that system none of them are easy to navigate.
Mhm.
But that one is especially challenging. We worked with that when I was at the homeless shelter because a lot of people would age out. And one positive thing I will say is that Eastern Michigan University, when I taught there, developed a center to support foster youth that were aging out, to support them and help teach life skills and give them extra mentoring, to help them matriculate through higher ed and college because of some of those, as you're probably very aware,
Yeah. Yeah.
challenges and deficiencies. So I just wanted to point out there are some universities and places responding in positive ways to some of those concerns.
And that's really
Mhm.
excellent because we were shocked at the age out, shocked at the idea that a child who's been through so much trauma, you hit this age, you're done. And no, she's definitely not done. Others are definitely not done. But our society doesn't want to see that. It does not want to really fix and address the crux of the issue. That would take It's not an impossible thing to do, I don't think. I think it's a will. We have the money in the society to do it, but it's not impossible to do it correctly. Mhm.
Agreed. Yeah, and as we look to more science, we do see like they age out at like 18, but we know they're not done
They're
developing
not
till
Mhm.
25.
correct.
Mhm.
Yes.
And this, yeah, kind of emerging adulthood is very much the area of young adults that I'd like to keep working with, um, and trying to figure out how to support them, and especially in this day and age of
Yes.
what's going on in the world with the mental health and the AI challenges and changes, let alone those that have been through navigating more challenging systems as well on top.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Well, I will just go ahead and say it. Your passion for this is palpable through the screen. So the question is, why do you study the topics you do?
Well, I think most of it is probably, I'd like to think empathy and critical thinking and lived experience. I was very fortunate to grow up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I say that because being in a college town, you do get exposure to a lot of really interesting and diverse individuals. Um, and just those help, social determinants of health, your environment really impacts a lot. But I still had troubles within my family and troubles that manifested later within the school system. Um, and so I got sent away. They do legal kidnapping or involuntary treatment, is a big thing. And resources, just the way I look at it is my parents didn't feel like I was safe where I was running away or the trying to get emancipated. And I didn't think it was safe with them and the dynamics that was going on in the household. And so they sent me away to this therapeutic boarding school. And that impacted me deeply because I met many others that struggled. We were all outliers, and a lot of my friends, even in middle and high school, were outliers. I lost a girlfriend to pregnancy, teen pregnancy from middle to high school, and she got sent away, So that was kind of one of those made a big
Mhm.
impact on me and how
Mhm.
they exiled and disappeared her. Um, for that instead of teaching us about, maybe sex education and prevention or helping support her in a different way.
Mhm.
And so I got sent away then too, but for different reasons, and met others, with a multitude of concerns, and was in a lot of group therapy, for better or for worse. And so I think it just really sensitized me to understanding, what we know a lot in sociology. There's this ideal society and reality that we like to talk about and discuss, and then there's the real.
Mhm.
And as sociologists, I always see us as looking, like in the Land of Oz, we look behind the green curtain
Mhm.
and
Yes.
and see both. And so I think that was something that was an advantage of these different challenges, was being able to see, the complexities of why a lot of us were misbehaving or acting out, not getting our basic needs met in some way or another, being misunderstood about, trauma-informed care wasn't there. There wasn't the same technology with like learning disabilities, or neurodivergencies or mental health resources, or even providing life skills and social skills. At least where I grew up, they weren't teaching budgeting. You know, they're not teaching emotional regulation, um, a lot of these different elements. And so I had a lot of sensitivity to that. I lost a lot of friends just even the year after we got out of the program, to suicide or overdose. And these were people that were near and dear to me. And so I think the stigma that surrounded a lot of deviance, the stigma that surrounds a lot of, substance use, stigmas around mental health. My uncle, even when I was very young, he has been out since the 80s and is HIV positive. And so I only learned about that when he got in a snowboarding accident. My parents were concerned he was going to die. So that's partly why I've always done this advocacy with HIV AIDS, and wanting to learn more about sexuality instead of stigmatize it. So I found myself attracted, and even with homelessness or inequality, I've recognized many of us, it is the birth lottery, and it's not any of us inherently better or worse. We're born into these systems that we have to navigate and understand. And then I feel like it's unnecessary that we socially construct these hierarchies or stigmas or different messaging. Um, and I've wanted to kind of fight that or combat that, and work towards, more of a shared humanity and way to support one another. And I think that's what's led to the passion, is that I do feel like there are solutions, there are different ways to do it. We don't have to always exploit our labor as heavily as we do, or others. And so, I mean, I guess I've always wanted to share whatever, use my voice and privilege and whatever has been bestowed on me, not by my own necessary merit, but by the system, to advocate for others and for myself, and kind of help shift the narrative, because I really believed in there's some really wonderful, amazing movements that America has done with our diversity, and really great values, and how eclectic it is, and even in the fight and spirit, of everyone here, if we channel it appropriately, for the greater good, that can be done. So I just really, with wisdom and compassion, believe we can get there, even as hard as it's been. And I've seen the difference in other people in lives when you give them these opportunities, when you give them second chances and opportunities for redemption, and when you provide people with housing first, and basic needs and services, how people can really transform themselves through the trans-theoretical model of change, when you empower them, when you allow them, instead of a very paternalistic way, is really beautiful, and a huge testament to what makes this world so, precious and wonderful and worth celebrating one another. So.
Thank you very much. That your answer touched my soul. So thank you very much.
He thought he was just hot wiring a car, and that was a skill he learned to be good at, and it made him popular. And he was, seeking approval, and we all want an in group. We don't want to be in the out group. We're very much
social creatures and mirror one another and work with one another. And so then he got caught up and they ended up, murdering somebody he didn't know. And the judge looked at him and was like, well, you're a very large, Black youth, so I can give you 9 months or the rest of your life.